Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ron Pacheco as I move this mic around.
And I'm Denise Dumas, and we are from RHEL.
All right, so great. So today we'd like to walk you through some elements of the RHEL roadmap. So Denise and I are going to do a little tag teaming. If it looks like a marketing slide because it's pretty, it's got color, it's mine. If it's got factual information, it's typically Denise's. All right, so let's kind of get started here. So Denise and I are going to talk a little bit about RHEL, which we're calling the modern operating system. And we're going to talk about it from three different perspectives going forward. We're not going to spend the time here, but my marketing friends are here. And we're going to talk about RHEL. Let me just kind of go through the bill here from three perspectives: control, confidence, and freedom. Control is making sure that you're the one who's always in control of what's happening with RHEL inside of your environment. And also, it's around security, making sure you're controlling and managing what's happening inside of your environment. The confidence piece is what we should be doing. It's making sure that stuff just works, right? You shouldn't have to second guess it. We don't want you having to run off to the man pages. We'll produce the man pages. We'll produce the documentation. But the point is, it should just work, right? And we started that starting with RHEL 7 as we started moving towards more of an API-centric view and a user interface view so that you don't have to spend a lot of time trying to figure it out. And then the last one is freedom, because at the end of the day, you know, you have a lot of challenges in your space, right? Even if you're on the sysadmin side, it's about getting those applications up and running and scaling them. And the last thing you want to have to worry about is RHEL underneath. So our job, if we're doing it well, is to almost be invisible, but something that you can trust and gives you the freedom to innovate in everything else. And that's how we're going to be talking about RHEL going forward. All right, so I want to start with this slide because last week IDC issued a report on operating systems and market share. And it was something that caught us by surprise in a very delightful way. Certainly RHEL has been growing quite well, and that's really thanks to all of you here in this room and others who are not in the room that have rewarded us with market share. The one thing that really caught our surprise is our CAGR, compounded annual growth rate for RHEL since the survey was last done, being at a 14.5%, which is outpacing the rest of the operating system market, no matter what type it is, whether it's a Linux base or a Unix base. So we feel really good, and again, but that's because of you having the confidence in us.
And now, we'd like to say thank you, by the way, thank you very much. We really appreciate it that you run RHEL.
And then on this side here, this was also a little bit stunning because the IDC research did not break out operating systems by deployment types. And so they were looking at an aggregate picture that included the operating system on that cell phone taking the picture, my RHEL laptop, Windows laptops, and everything else. And the RHEL share of the entire operating system market worldwide is 7.4%. And if you think about the fact that we are predominantly a server-oriented company and being compared even against the likes of Apple, who also powers my cell phone, that's a rather impressive number. And again, I'm going to join Denise in thanking you for giving us that confidence, giving us your confidence in order to be able to run your business. Yes, it's a marketing slide.
You know, it shows RHEL is a pretty safe bet.
Yep. All right, now, I'm not going to walk through this slide. You may have seen elements of this on the web or presentations from us, but I'm going to highlight just two things because we're going to talk about them today. One of them is data reduction. If you're following Red Hat, back in August of 2017, we acquired a small company called Permabit that was delivering a product that they called the Virtual Data Optimizer, which was doing compression deduplication on the fly. We'll talk about that. And then certainly, I think you've all heard of something called CoreOS by show of hands, right? And so hopefully you've already consumed the announcements. You may have seen the webcast that Paul Cormier and others delivered, which has a lot of information. And so Denise and I are just going to do a little bit of a summary to sort of address the RHEL portion of that announcement. Now, commercial announcement from my lawyer. Actually, she didn't tell me to do this. I don't know if our lawyers in the room would like to have fun with them. But the reason we're just putting up a legal disclaimer, because this is a roadmap session. So certainly Denise and I will talk a little bit about what we've done in the last year, particularly around 7475, and talk a little bit about some of the things that we're looking towards in 76. And of course, we're going to be looking for some input from you along the way. So we don't want you to, bet the business on everything you see coming out of this presentation, because guaranteed, if product management created this presentation, I'm not sure Denise is fully buying in at this point anyway. So look at her, not me.
Well,
All right.
we also had a session yesterday that looked further into the future of RHEL. So if you didn't have a chance to catch Siddharth Nagar and Mike McGrath's session yesterday, find it on the Summit website.
Yes.
What was it called, the roadmap?
Yes, the roadmap to the future. Towards the end of the presentation, we do have a slide that has the session number, so you can, take a picture of it and then go look at the session. The sessions, many of the sessions, that one was indeed recorded, so we'll be publishing that on our website within a couple of weeks of the close of the summit. All right, so just to ground ourselves and making sure we're not totally boring you, Denise won't bore you, but I may, is by show of hands, how many of you are here for your first summit? That's like fantastic. Thank you for coming to the summit. I'm hoping this is meeting your expectations, or even better, exceeding your expectations. And certainly we will love your feedback along the way. Please do take the time to go visit the Red Hat booth. We have quite a bit of our staff. I'll be willing to take your input, but also answer any questions you have, either about this presentation or other things that we're doing with the business. Now, again, for grounding exercises, how many of you are running most of your workloads on 7? Very cool. What about on RHEL 6? Yeah, a little bit more? I skipped something there, but I want to ask how many are running multiple versions in production? Okay, that's great, because that's a very common occurrence that we see. Your business is dictated by your business applications, and if they ain't broke, don't fix them, right? So you're going to run multiple versions, you'll virtualize them or whatever. That's quite a common occurrence. And then also, how many of you are running Linux containers in production today? Okay, some hands. How many are just sort of like still in the eval phase, or just kind of figuring it out along the way? All right, cool. That makes sense to us. All right, so...
Can I ask one more?
Yes.
I got to ask, how many of you are still running RHEL 5? Yes, I knew it. I knew there would be something.
All right, now, she asked that for a specific reason, but she told me not to say why.
Good things never quit.
All right, very good. All right, so there is a little bit of RHEL 5 on the slide here. Let me just kind of go there then, Denise. RHEL 5, as you know, has gone into retirement and is currently on extended life support. For those of you running RHEL 5 at this point in time, I certainly hope and trust that you have an extended life support offering the subscription to accompany what you're doing in RHEL 5 in production. And Denise will talk about Spectre and Meltdown in RHEL 5. All right, now I'm going to...
I hope you had support.
I'm going to jump up to the top of the roadmap and just kind of highlight a couple of things up on top. First, that we have formally declared support for our Enterprise Linux server for the ARM architecture. As you know, we have been coming to summits for the last 5 to 6 years and talking about a lot of the development work we have been doing in the upstream communities and in the standards bodies. So now that we believe that is now sort of a stable platform. In other words, even though there are multiple silicon vendors, they're all standards based. And we have OEMs that are currently putting that into the market. We feel very comfortable making that available to you. How many of you are interested in looking at ARM from a server production perspective? Okay.
Hands over here, Ron.
Hands over here? And then what, even Red Hatters?
Telcos?
All right. Good, all right, well, that's good. And then also we did Power 9 LE. Now the reason we do this, right, is to make sure that as you're moving to having the right tool for the right job, either version of RHEL or an architecture, that we can provide you with the full support of RHEL no matter what your choice is. You know, our goal, our shared goal is to make sure that your experience with RHEL is consistent on any architecture as well as any footprint, physical, virtual, private, or public. And that's what we're going to be doing with those architectures. Now, of course, you know, we do support, System 390 x86-64, and that's what's under the standard RHEL 7 server, the general purpose server. The other thing you will notice, we certainly have talked about RHEL atomic hosts in the past, but now we have more and a growing number of opinionated versions of RHEL. What I mean by opinionated, these things are tuned and optimized for very specific deployment types, right? Such as RHEL for real time. If your business is driven by determinism, that's what atomic hosts, that's what RHEL for real time does. If you're container-based and you're trying to understand how can I use containers in production, with RHEL, with your RHEL subscription, you can always use RHEL atomic hosts to stand up and start developing and deploying containers in production because it's fully supported on atomic host. Then we started looking at some of the more common workloads sitting out there, some a little bit complex, like RHEL for SAP application, SAP HANA, right? SAP HANA, as those of you, any of you using HANA in production or on an eval, I think you understand quite well that it's a long process to get HANA stood up. It requires the cooperation of your favorite hardware vendor, RHEL, and of course SAP to come to a certified configuration. And then once you get that stood up, it takes a while to even think about trying to change it. But more importantly, you want that tuned and optimized, right? You don't want to have to do additional optimizations in order to be able to maximize the value of that. And so that's one thing that we've been doing, is coming out with opinionated versions of RHEL.
Absolutely,
All right.
and we think we'd like to probably do more of those in the future if you guys see a value that that brings.
Thank you, Denise. All right, and then we have RHEL 6. We saw a lot of hands on RHEL 6. As you know, we delivered 6.9 middle to the late of 2017, as you see in the roadmap. We are indeed currently planning what will probably be the last minor release on RHEL 6, 2010. Those are approximate dates. And this, again, don't go bet the farm. But I'll tell you what our combined assurances are, that we're going to only deliver the critical bugs and the critical security rata to make sure we don't destabilize what you have running in production. Now, if you're running RHEL 6 in production, you're also probably thinking about that roadmap and the planning. You know, when do I have to worry about RHEL 6? Well, actually, it's quite a while. Right now, the retirement date for RHEL 6 is November 2020, but we've also already publicly declared that we will offer an extended life support for RHEL 6 out till about June 2024. The reason we did it is, as we saw from the show of hands, a lot of people running RHEL 6 in production, right? And a lot of people also trying to figure out their, when and how do they migrate their workloads from 6 to 7. And it's going to take a while with the number of workloads that you're running. So we want to make sure we give you plenty of runway in order to take care of that. The same way we did with RHEL 5 as it went into retirement. As many of you know, when we started RHEL 5, it was 7 years. We moved it to 10. And then we added an extended life support, giving you time to be able to bridge your environment, because sometimes it's just difficult, right? Mm-hmm. You've got workloads that are locked into versions of RHEL because of either compliance requirements or it ain't broke, you lost the source code.
Fix it. Yeah, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. By the way, Ron, you didn't mention, but 6.10 right now is in beta. So if you have a RHEL subscription, you have access to 6.10 and you can see where it is. Right, but what we tried to do in that release is clean up everything that we knew that was outstanding. So it's the big cleanup.
And Denise, I think, thanks for the reminder that we also want your feedback, right? It is out in beta. We put it publicly because we need your honest feedback. So please
let's make sure we didn't miss anything.
Do take the time. And same is going to be true when we put out 7.6 towards the end of the year. We're going to want your feedback along the way. All right, let me ask about software collections developers too. So how many people familiar with that portion of your RHEL subscription? All right, so if you're not aware, software collections developers toolset are a part of your RHEL subscription. And what they are, if I try to summarize them very quickly, is the software collections is the way we distribute updated versions of databases and languages and frameworks that you can use in production. So for example, I think hopefully everyone understands with RHEL 7 we delivered MariaDB as a default. I forget the version of it, but that version is old from some people's minds, right? We freeze a version in RHEL in order to get you to the 10-year stability, but sometimes you need updated versions, so your applications are demanding it. So if you need an updated version of MariaDB, You can get updated versions of MariaDB in the Red Hat software collections, which we update every 6 months. If you are using MySQL in RHEL 5 and RHEL 6, and that's how your business is run, and you want to continue using 7, that would be in the software collections. And then the developer toolset does the same thing for compilers, debuggers, and a lot of the performance monitoring tools that used to be in RHEL. The reason the performance monitoring tools are there is so we could deliver them with greater frequency, and then first and foremost, train your developers to learn how to design and create a performance-oriented tooling, right? But of course, you can also use those in production. So for example, from a compiler perspective, if you're looking for updated versions of GCC, you would find them there. If you're interested in LLVM, Rust, Go, that's where you're going to find it. And it comes with support from Red Hat pursuant to the, I said pursuant like a lawyer, pursuant to the life cycles that we published for those. But hopefully you can see that gives you a curated content set from Red Hat with the security and support for a defined period, such that your developers are not just going and pulling stuff down from upstream and then creating chaos for you in your production environments. Now, the last thing here, I'm going to point this out because I've heard a lot of customers are a little bit confused when they now see full support, maintenance support 1 and 2, and you're like, hey, what happened? Well, the reality is nothing has happened. In the past, they were called production phase 1, 2, and 3. So what we have told you in the past, in those production phases we will do still holds true. But the reason we changed the name of production, the production phases into full maintenance support 1 and 2 is to be aligned with the rest of the Red Hat portfolio. Because how many of you are using multiple Red Hat products in production? And I think you know that RHEL is the only one that uses the production phase terminology, the others don't. And so what we wanted to do is make sure we give you one common set of nomenclature when you're thinking about your product's life cycle and support. All right, Denise, I think it's time to give this audience a break from my ears, and maybe you can soothe their voices there with your voice.
I'm going to keep calling on you, though.
All right.
So one of the things that we always emphasize with RHEL, because we know that it's incredibly important to our customer base, is security. And it's been quite an interesting year, both in terms of the security features that we've delivered as part of the versions of RHEL that we've shipped, and in terms of the number of security vulnerabilities that have shown up this year. But I wanted to talk with you a little bit about network-bound disk encryption. So network-bound disk encryption, we shipped LUX encryption for volumes way back in RHEL 6, but LUX is a bit of a problem, right? Because you need to enter a key, a password, every time you reboot the system. And of course, if you have a deployment in a cloud, if you have any kind of an infrastructure at scale, that really makes it not all that useful. It's great for your laptop, not all that great for your data center. So to give you better large-scale management of encryption for boot volumes, for data volumes, for removable media as well, we've added in network-bound disk encryption. With NBDE, you have an additional password on top of, additional key material on top of your LUX password that lets you tie the ability to decrypt a disk to a network. So you cannot access that disk unless you're on a trusted network. What's this saying? Money talks and data walks?
Yes.
Right? Well, with network-bound disk encryption, you've got more security against that. So we've got double layers of password. Unless you can reach the network server that can do the decrypt for you, you go nowhere. I mean, if you've ever tried to set up a PKI, right, you know how painful that is. So we wanted to give you an easy-to-use way to get that level of encryption.
Yeah, and Denise, if you could just roll that back for a second, because often we think about securing our data. The reason we say is the hybrid cloud, because this is something that we know is important when you're on premises, right? Because you've got to manage a lot of systems in your data center. But how many of you is now pushing data out into the cloud or running workloads out in the cloud? All right, no one trusts the cloud either. But you know, there may be a point in time in which you start running workloads out in the cloud, and if you read the terms and conditions from all the public cloud providers, they're very brutally honest and upfront. They will tell you what they're doing to secure their infrastructure, but they're also very clear that the security of your data is your responsibility. So the reason we like network-bound disk encryption is because as you establish that trusted network, right, where there is a server that has nothing more than a public key that will unravel the password for the Lux device, is you can set that trusted network across multiple data centers or even off into a cloud. So if you need to, you know, manage workloads and data that's running in the cloud as well as on premises, you can set up one trusted network so you can control access to your data where you perhaps have the most concern. And I think that's part of the reason why we don't see as many hands up and running, because you're legitimately concerned about the security of your data in someone else's data center.
I also like that you can set it up for removable media, right? Because, you know, then you no longer have to put super glue into those USB ports.
Indeed.
At least as some of our customers have had to do in the past. We also, by the way, it's not on the slides, but we added in USB guard, right? Which we should probably mention.
Yes.
Because USB guard gives you the ability to configure your USB ports, restrict their use to specific device types. So this port can only accept cameras. This port can't accept disks.
And you can also, as Denise moves to the next slide, with USB guard, you can also set, sort of the time of day in which any particular port can be touched. So for example, if you just want to use the port 0 in front of the server rack and only for keyboards during your normal business hours, you can do that. This way, when you go home and you want to go rest a little bit here, rest assured that the janitor is not in the data center plugging in a mass storage device or another keyboard while you think you're resting comfortably.
Yeah, good point. So you saw our partnership announcement with Azure as we talk about deployments of OpenShift out in that cloud. And so you can imagine we've wanted to make sure that the work that we do as we interact with Windows is going to have additional levels of security as well. So one of the things that we did to support that is made sure that we updated Samba so that it now defaults to SMBv3. So it's much more secure than SMBv2. It gives us the ability to do encrypted access to CFS. We did a lot of performance enhancements as well to IDM, the Identity Management Server. So IDM has been integrated with Active Directory for quite some time now. Got to be 6.
It's been a while since, certainly since the early days of RHEL 6, so we're talking about 6, 7+ years in production, longer from a development perspective.
But we've seen customers doing interesting things with identity management, like moving it out to the cloud, right? So we've done some enhancements to make it easier to configure, and we've done some performance improvements.
Right, so that gives you sort of the ability to be able to move with the interoperability instead of trying to manage your Windows users and your Linux users separately with this level of integration. If you want to continue to partition and manage your Linux users using identity management, right, you can have that directly talk into Active Directory, and this way your AD admin can actually manage all of your users as if they were Windows users. So this way, now you can get those Windows admins to actually do some really good, important, honest work. Oops.
Yeah. I didn't hear you say that. Spectre and Meltdown. Okay, so this is how the engineering team spent our Christmas vacation. And Karen will vouch for that. Yeah. So Spectre and Meltdown, I mean, for those of you who run infrastructure, you absolutely have been dealing with this, right? Spectre and Meltdown are a new and interesting class of security vulnerability, side channel attacks. And side channel attacks take advantage of a lot of the work that's been done to get performance improvements into microarchitectures over the last 15 years. The mitigations for these attacks are invasive and expensive, and they come at a performance cost. And so it's been really interesting to try to tackle this as best we can to make sure that the performance that we lose by disabling features at the chip level through the updated microcode that you've probably all been busy installing, that we've tried to get some of that performance back within the Linux kernel by moving to a technique called RHEL. In any event, the thing that I wanted to mention here is that all of the CVE work that we do happens under embargo. So consortia of industry members have an agreement that we will give the time to ourselves to try to get mitigations in place so that when security vulnerabilities are revealed, our customer bases have the opportunity to pick up fixes immediately so that there's no window between exposure and patch availability. Unfortunately, sometimes those embargoes lift early, right? When someone gets wind of an issue, when someone in the media publishes something, that's exactly what happened with Spectre and Meltdown. We had a bad feeling that something like that was going to happen because there was so much discussion about these fixes. So what Red Hat did is we had a worst case set of patches available in our back pockets, ready to ship, just in case, while we were working on the better performance work called RHEL. As it turned out, it was a good thing that we did that because the embargo got lifted. Somebody talked. And fortunately, we had fixes ready to go. So how many of you ended up applying microcode and kernel fixes on that wonderful day? Yeah. Wasn't that fun? Yeah. Yeah, it's the gift that keeps on giving, right? So as you can see from this chart, there is an enormous set of supported kernels and products that depend upon the kernel that we had to make sure were patched and validated and ready to go so that there was no time in which you guys were going to be unprotected. The other thing that Red Hat did that differentiated a little bit from what upstream ended up doing eventually is we recognized that there's a huge performance impact to some of these things, right? And so we put the fixes that we had in under feature control. So there were knobs that you can turn that were really difficult to explain, as it turned out, but there were lots of knobs that you could turn so that you could have better control over what security fixes were enabled and disabled in case you couldn't take the performance penalty while we were working on the RHEL fixes. Right. Ron, anything that you want to add here?
Yes. If you were using those wonderful free Linux distributions because you were saving money, and you were worried about Spectre Meltdown, I spent the time when certainly I was sweating bullets when I saw that it was violated and I was trying to see what's happening in the industry. So I just happened to cruise over to other distributions websites that pretty much said, darn it, we were planning on January the 9th. Somebody jumped the gun. Why don't you come back to my website in 6 days? Now imagine running your production environment for an additional 6 days after the community, the entire world has learned not only what these things were, but actually how to execute those exploits. And if that's how you like to run your business, go for it. But at the same time, putting the kidding aside, right? That's part of the value subscription that we bring forth to you, right? It's not about how many bug reports and cases you file with us. It's ensuring that we have your back when these types of things happen. As Denise said, this was perhaps one of the largest vulnerabilities in the industry in a very long time. And with that value to subscription, Denise and her team not only spent a lot of time together at Christmas and over New Year's, but also bringing in the power of the performance team that was busily characterizing all of the experimental patches that the upstream community was collaborating on. And that is why we're able to get to the point of RHEL, partnering with Google and others, and be able to characterize the performance degradation. Because if you saw on January 3rd, when we published the patches, one of the things we did was we had a webinar that not only described the vulnerabilities, we also had the characterization of the performance impact based on the types of workloads. And that's part of the value subscription that we hope that you recognize that we're trying to bring to you every day.
Well, I hope that while you were here, you had the opportunity to talk with Shaq and some of the guys from the performance team. They busted their tails on this one, as did the virtualization team and the security team and the kernel team. And it's been really, it's interesting to watch something like this kind of roll through, because it's not often that security vulnerabilities give, well, it's particularly bad when a guest in JRandom Cloud can attack both the other guests that might happen to be co-resident on a host, as well as attack the hypervisor, right? So it was really particularly
And
bad.
Denise, before you move out the slide, I don't want people running out of the room at this point in time, but at the bottom of the slide is the pointer to John Masters' talk that's happening at the same time, in which he is going through the chronology of Spectre and Meltdown, but also talking about the work that he and others in the upstream community are doing with the security research organizations to figure out how do we mitigate this from ever happening, having to be able to patch it. So thanks for staying in here. Please, somebody please close the doors. But I'll let you know that John's talk is indeed being recorded, so you'll be able to view that in the near future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, side channel attacks are interesting and difficult. But I'm going to move on to a happier topic. Virtual Data Optimizer. So we acquired a small company called Permabit last August. And I keep saying, best acquisition ever. Permabit has a technology called Virtual Data Optimizer that is now part of RHEL 7.5. So guess what? Their product, we buy their product, right? We buy them and their product, and then we make it available to you as part of your RHEL subscription. This, as it turns out, is pretty huge. So video fits right into the storage stack. It slides right in there. And it works with the device mapper, and it gives you the ability to do dedupe and compression on the fly, on the way to the disk, which means that you can save a bunch of money on disk storage, and you have to do a lot fewer disk writes if you happen to have the right data configuration. So cost savings, performance, right? What's not to like? And it comes as part of your subscription. So if you just take a look at the way that video data reduction processing happens, it's multiple passes, right? And so, of course, if you're going to be operating on blocks, it's going to cost you a little bit of memory. Ain't no such thing as a free lunch. But it does a pass in which it eliminates 0 blocks, and then a pass in which it eliminates duplicate blocks, then it compresses the remaining blocks, and then then they go off to the disk. And in fact, because it is integrated into the storage stack, you could also add something like encrypting those blocks before they go off to get written, right, through something like dencrypt. So it's all there in 7.5.
And Denise, often, I get a question, like one of the questions I was getting quite often at the summit is, what's the performance penalty associated with VDO? Well, the performance penalty is sort of an interesting one to try to characterize, because the first thing you have to recognize is that what you're doing is you're going direct to memory, right? So at least from a latency perspective, that's your data path, right, from processor into memory, right, and then the ability for the memory to just go out and read out to the disk. So you're operating at the speed of memory, right, from the data creation to the compression deduplication and then out to the writes. So we haven't really formally characterized the performance piece of it, but as Denise said, it's sitting at the device mapper level. So if you have been characterizing anything that you do at the DM level, then I think you have a very good approximation in terms of the quote unquote performance penalty of turning on VDO, whether it's either the compression capability, the duplication ability, or both.
Yeah. So this is my not so subtle way of saying, if you have not picked up 7.5 and taken it for a spin, it would be really good to do that, because I think you would like what you see. And as always, right, your mileage may vary. So clearly, when you're looking at things like eliminating 0 blocks and eliminating duplicate blocks, it implies that your data picture has blocks like that in the first place, right? So if you don't have any 0 blocks, you don't get any benefit from eliminating 0 blocks. But we've done a lot of work trying to characterize some of the pictures of some of the data types. And this, this is like, don't take it to the bank, because it's us, kicking tires. We don't have real customer workloads to work from oftentimes. But clearly, things like storing backups, storing virtual desktops, storing virtual servers, right? Containers, places where there's a lot of duplication in the content that's heading to the disk. That's where you're going to get the most benefit out of this. But we think that there are a lot of workloads in which those things really matter.
Right, and that's what the left side of that represents, right? So certainly the engineering team spent a lot of time trying to characterize it, at least based on the workloads that we have access to. And the first thing they did was actually go after the left side, the more common things, because I'd assume everybody here is running a database of some type, right? And that's why the team actually started with the databasing, right? So these are things where you generate a lot of data, and as you see on the slide, based on our internal, these are unaudited numbers, based on our internal, testing is you can compress that to X, right, and save about half of your storage cost. Now, think about how you're managing your storage and your storage costs, right? You may have some very expensive arrays. That's number one. Number two, you may be using solid-state devices, which are fairly expensive. And not only the expensive, is they're subject to wear, right? So by being able to do the data reduction, the duplication, the amount of space that we have to be writing solid-state storage starts to drop, and hopefully this may actually elongate the life of those ultra-expensive devices.
Mm-hmm. That can't be written forever. Manageability. Yeah. So sometimes this is what managing a Linux system feels like to me.
Can anybody relate to that?
Yeah. Every bell, every whistle, every knob. Read the man page. Oh, God, I don't want to read another man page. Right? Oh, let me just Google that. That's right. This is the generation that just Googles it. But what's really interesting is if this is managing one box, this is what managing at scale looks like. Right?
Is that what your world looks like every day?
Yeah. All I want to do is like fly the darn plane. So we recognize that there's a whole generation of people who want nothing at all to do with the man pages and who really are not so much into the command line. And sometimes you just have to get things done in a hurry. And so when you need to get things done in a hurry and you need to stand up a box and understand like what's new in 7.5, I'm going to stand up an instance, right? You need a tool that lets you just do it fast. And so we now have configuration management available via a web console. It's based on a project called Cockpit, and it's been available in RHEL for 2 versions.
Since 7.1 at a minimum, because this web console is what you have if you've used Atomic Host. And how many of you have OpenShift or been evaluating OpenShift? Don't tell the OpenShift guys. I kind of like, no, just kidding. This is actually the very same web console that's already integrated into OpenShift, right? That's important because a lot of what we do on the RHEL side is making sure that we give you some consistency as you move up and across the portfolio. So you have the way you would do that configuration, when you're starting off with a single server with RHEL, it's the same way you're going to do it if you're starting off with a single instance of OpenShift. So you have some continuity of knowledge in particular.
And the nice thing about the console is that it's totally plug-in based, right? So we can add new, the ability to manage more and more and more things over time, which is exactly what we've been doing. It's easy to set up. You can just SSH into it. It's multi-server kind of, sorta.
And then, yeah, that's good. On either 2 slides, it's fine, Denise. What you should notice on the left-hand side of the bar, where it's a little bit dark, is all of the subsystems you can configure within RHEL. And each one of them also has sort of a drop-down. Like, for example, in this particular case, this is networking, right? And on this slide, there's 2 things that Denise is showing. First up on top is monitoring in real time. So you can see your packets that are being sent and received. So if you're just trying to get a view of what's happening within that box, maybe within a subsystem, this web console will give you that visibility. And Denise, on the, I can't see it from here now because I'm a little blinded.
Bonding, easy to set up. You never have to Google those commands again, right? You never have to go hunting for examples. I'm so tired of hunting for examples. We decided we would make it easy to configure this stuff. Right? Think of configuring storage. Is that not a pain? So you can configure storage. So like one of the things that we did with VDO, right? We're going to get VDO in so that you don't have to do a complicated storage configuration, right? You guys know what that's like. Over time, we're adding more and more and more of these things. So one of the things that we can do is do workflow tooling for workloads like SAP HANA. Right?
Is that something of interest, having us give you the ability to do the configuration of key workloads within this framework? No, the workflow for the workload. Is that something of interest? The idea is to help you get through sort of the configuration of some complex workloads fairly quickly so that you can then go off and deploy those. Is that something of interest sort of in the longer term?
So you can use your brain cells for better things.
Okay.
Another thing that we're looking at, and again, this is something, there's a project called Boom that we shipped in 7.5. Boom lets you make LVM snapshots bootable, right, which is really cool. So you can do backup and rollback within LVM snapshots, but that's something that we're looking at making a web console plugin for. We think that that would be like really nice, easy, good to have. Yes?
All right.
Yeah? Bootable rollback? Yeah? What else? Well, tell us what else anyway. Send us mail.
You send us mail, see us down in the booth or see us after the talk, but we definitely want to understand what are the things you want to be able to manage through that interface. As Denise said, certainly it helps you stand things up fairly quickly, or maybe you don't have time to go read the man pages, but also we also recognize that many of you are running, managing, thousands, if not tens of thousands of systems, which could also be virtual machines. And as fantastic as you are at scripting, you don't necessarily spend the time, and so having something like this, we think can help you with your efficiency. As you try to get things configured and get to a sort of a standard configuration that you can then go off and deploy across all of your virtual machines.
Yeah. I mean, you can get to a shell from Cockpit if you want to, but you shouldn't have to. RHEL system roles.
Who's heard of Ansible? Please don't go run to their session. All right, just kidding. But Denise.
So one of the issues, so I saw that a lot of you are running multiple versions of RHEL in your environments. And you know that as we go from major version to major version, right, the API, if you will, for a Linux distribution tends to be the config file. And that's really painful because things change upstream over time, right, and config files change. And then your automation breaks. And that's always been a problem for people going from major version to major version of RHEL. So we know that that's a problem, and we wanted to give a layer that insulates you from the pain of whatever goes on in, I don't know, crony config files, right, or whatever. And that's where Ansible comes in. Since we know you've got 6, you've got 7, hopefully someday you'll have 8, right? We want to give you a way to configure things easily and consistently in your automation so that when the operating system changes underneath, your automation doesn't break. So we have, it's the next slide. That's what I'm looking for. It's the next slide. We have a lot of roles in there right now. We started introducing these in like 7.4-ish, and I think they're fully supported for 7.5. Right now, we can help you configure networking, SE Linux, time sync, postfix, kdump, and there's more coming over time. So we'll be able to automate better storage configuration, logging, metrics, yada, 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 right? There's a theme here. So the deal is that once you've used the playbooks, we will keep you working. So over major release boundaries, we will not break you.
Right,
Your automation works.
So the goal is it gives us the opportunity to deliver the innovation that you need from the bottom up, but insulate you from some of those little idiosyncrasies. In other words, gain the performance, gain the bandwidth, the things that you're looking for, but not have to figure out a different way in order to be able to manage that. And that's what the system roles intended to give you a level of abstraction from all the goodness underneath, so that, again, it gives you the freedom to not have to worry about what's there, but also have the confidence to be able to deploy it.
And I will confess that in order to do this, we had to be opinionated, right? So if there are 101 configuration options, we probably expose 20 of them, right? Because that's the kind of deal. But you know, for the most part, those 101 options, you probably only really care about 10 of them.
But that doesn't mean we're removing the ability to go manually deal with those config files. That will always still be there. The idea is give you a way to be able to automate this, particularly as you start to either move workloads from one version of RHEL to the next, or perhaps you're sort of trying to do a mass migration and kind of update a full data center, or maybe even start a whole new deployment footprint.
Containers, our favorite topic. So containers are Linux. Linux is RHEL. So you guys know, right? Containers, it's a fancy word for a Linux process. Boy, that's a lot of hype around a process. But there's a lot of work that goes into the operating system itself in order to make containers supportable, secure, manageable, and all of this is plumbed right in through the stack, right? So in addition, all the low levels of support, we have support that we've been adding over time in the kernel, particularly with the C group support, to expand the use of namespaces so that we can bind those processes, those containers, so that they can't get outside of where you want them to be. We've got seccomp and SE Linux that help you keep those containers within bounds. No. I mean, it's all really tightly integrated, which is the thing that you don't tend to think about. Ron, anything that you want to add to this?
No, I'd say, you know, as you move to the next slide, which will be a little bit of summary of what was announced yesterday, as well as Ben Briard's talk, is on the prior slide. The point is the reason we talk about it as a distribution, because in order to be able to reliably deploy containers on any footprint you want, that's the consistency you need, and that's the consistency that RHEL brings. All right, so yesterday, there was quite a bit, yesterday and the day before, there was an announcement, there was a press release on Tuesday about the CoreOS acquisition and what it means, and then yesterday, Ben Briard, one of our colleagues, did a fantastic talk that was recorded yesterday. I encourage you to please look at that recording. If I'm going to summarize it just from the RHEL perspective and what does it mean to things like atomic host, there are a couple of things. First and foremost is that community will continue, so will Container Linux, right? It serves a very important purpose in order to be able to do that very fast. The second thing is that our plans is to ultimately create a supported version of Container Linux, and it's going to have a name called Red Hat CoreOS. So that will be the branded name. The next thing is to note is that where you will first see this implemented is on the OpenShift Container Platform, online, and in OpenShift Dedicated. That's where you see it. This is because in that particular platform, you need to be able to have that fast iteration underneath, which is a little bit different than what you would do sort of in a standard RHEL footprint. Then beyond that, we do have Atomic Host. Our plans are to continue to support Atomic Host out through 2020, and then we will also be phasing Atomic Host over in favor of the Red Hat CoreOS. And then the last commercial announcement, as we get the hook from the back, our colleagues, Mike McGrath and Siddharth Nagar, did a talk yesterday that talked about the roadmap, the road to the future. So what's beyond, RHEL 7.5 and 7.6 and beyond. So we also encourage you to please do consume that recording.
We've got a ton of stuff in flight. It's going to be really fun this next year.
And with that, we just like to thank everyone.
Yes. Thank you, guys.